This is Thorin, and I'm joined here by Reginald, owner of Team SolodMid, TSM, and former player in the League of Legends division. And there's obviously been a lot of discussion recently in the events that unfolded with the players, open letter to the PEA, and then the responses from some of the owners within the PEA, and specifically, obviously, related to Reginald, because it's led to a situation where it looks like seangares is being removed or his time in TSM has come to an end after not being there for very long. So I want to discuss all of this with him. And for the sake of this interview, since there's so much to get through, like when I myself was researching it, just to read through everyone's responses and then all the back and forth and all the videos that were put out. It's a lot of stuff. So I want to make this pretty concise. Like I want to make it so I ask a specific question and you respond to that specific topic. Like it's not going to be super vague and lots of long answers in theory. We'll see how it goes as we go through. So what I want to start with is this, just to kind of lay the groundwork. Since seangares wasn't in the team very long, but he was a recent addition and is fairly high profile addition to the team when you consider what the North American lineup had done this year. What was the logic behind why you wanted seangares in the first place? Like, why was he added to TSM?
I think the big reason why he was added to TSM is because he is a successful in-game leader. He's been one for a really long time, and our team was lacking direction. It didn't work with the old squad. We recruited a lot of younger talent, and our goal was to be able to develop talent and really learn how to develop talent while we're picking up young talent. The goal was to also learn how to do it from an organization standpoint. So because he is a really reputable player and a former in-game leader for Cloud9 and also several other NA teams, we thought that he could be a good addition to our brand. So he can really help develop the younger players under our brand and our team.
Okay, so I'd actually heard behind the scenes though, like when the initial reports came out that he was going to join the team, some people told me that they were actually surprised by this because they'd heard like maybe initially you were hesitant to add him to TSM. Is this the case? Like, was it something where you just saw him and you picked him up instantly? Was there any reason behind why you might have questioned the move?
Well, I mean, you generally measure how good people are by their results, right? And even though he had really good results as an in-game leader in the past, you have to keep in mind like his recent history. And he wasn't successful on Echo Fox, and also, he left Cloud9, and Cloud9 is still performing really well. So I was really hesitant on picking him up because he's been playing for a really long time. And when you have a player that's been playing for that long, generally they're focused on other things in life, and I didn't really think that, or I thought that there would be a potential where he would not be as hungry to win and be as focused on his job. And after having our CS:GO manager talk to him and our players talk to him, they were convinced that he was the best option. So I had I had really little decision making on picking up Sean. It was mainly our CS:GO manager, aka like Derek Strong, and also all of our players and our coaching staff, Valence included. They all wanted him, and so it was mainly their decision, more so than mine, because I don't have as much experience in CS:GO as they do.
Okay. So when seangares left Cloud9, a lot of people actually assumed he was going to retire at the time. And then when he decided to go with Echo Fox, one of the reasons behind the scenes that people said was like, oh, he's obviously gotten a very good offer from Echo Fox. Must be a higher amount of money, maybe a lot of say in who he recruits to the team. When you were recruiting him to TSM, like what were the expectations for him? Whatever role he would play within TSM.
So there were two big things that I was looking for Sean to do, right? Developing our players inside game and really teaching them how to play the game competitively, because a lot of our players are young and they came from rank S, right? They don't play the game as competitive players should play, right? So there's not as much consistency there, and the goal is for Sean to make them consistent. The second thing we wanted him to do was be a really good role model for our players from a sponsor perspective and also from a branding perspective. And so when we decided to sign Sean, we went through a series of negotiation going in through like every single term of the contract, from his pay to like what is expected out of him. And so those are the expectations, is for him to develop our players, be a good role model for his sponsors. And that's why we justified giving him a really high salary, is for him to represent our sponsors well. Sean is famous within the CS:GO scene. He's a big brand ambassador. He's also he has a long history of being part of the scene. So we thought that signing him would be good for that aspect.
Okay. So One of the interesting things I thought to ask you is when people have seen this scenario that happened with the PEA letter, and obviously we're really going to get into this topic, one of the key aspects of it is the notion of players having the right, or like an important authoritative voice was the line used in the PEA thing, as to where they get to play and which leagues they get to play. And so I can understand why the public would feel sorry, for example, or have a lot of sympathy for a player who maybe signed his contract. Let's say they signed a contract a year ago. So they'd signed it like, beginning of January or end of December. Now that player, when he signs the contract, sure, it still says within his contract, the team decides where he plays and all these sorts of things. He has no stipulation saying he has a right. But at the time, there was no PEA. He assumes you're going to compete in every league you can compete in. You'd say in good faith that most players would assume that was the case. Now, since seangares signed with your team very recently, and he signed after PEA came into it came into an existence, and it was already known some of the plans of PEA. Was there any of this discussion when you say you went through all the contract terms? Was there a discussion about this topic? Like what to say will he have as a player as the way he plays, or TSM retains that right? What can you say on this topic?
So yeah, so that was something we discussed in our contract negotiations, right? There were several things that he wanted. We discussed financial terms. We discussed terms on how he should, um, act as a brand ambassador. We discussed several terms, and one of the terms he did bring up was the ability to play in events. And you know how a negotiation works, right? You bring up all your concerns, and you cave on some, and you try to find a mutual ground
Sure.
with another party that you're really interested in working long term. And in the negotiation, that was brought up, and that was something that he agreed on signing, full well knowing that we wanted to do the PEA, and full well knowing that he was going to give up his right to choose on what events to play. And in return, by agreeing to those specific terms, he would get paid more. So in the negotiation, he brought up several terms, but he mainly focused on his financial terms. So he gave up the ability to choose on what event to play and what events he should choose to get a higher salary. And he even referenced, like, I have email logs. I don't want to show this publicly, but I can prove it that
Okay.
he gave up his ability to pick and choose what events he wanted in return for more salary. He wanted a higher salary than every other player because of how big his brand is. He wanted, how much a tier one player would be paid in NA, a top performing team. He wanted a really high salary. In return, he would do more sponsor work and be a really good brand ambassador, similar to how he did a lot of sponsor work on EchoFox. And that was something I was fine with, right? Because I'm committed to CSGO in the long term. I wanted to build out a league. I wanted to obviously, be able to throw events within the PEA. So I agreed to compensate him even more for him to agree to those terms. And so that's like why I was like so frustrated when he went public around the situation a week after he had signed. He agreed to that term. He asked to be paid more, and then he refused to do what he promised. Right, like with any contract that you do with anyone or with any job you do, there are certain services that you have to do as as a contractor or as a player, and he promised to those terms, and then he in return got paid more. But then he didn't go to me and say, "Hey, Andy, actually, I changed my mind. I want that term out. Let me reduce my salary. Hey, Andy, actually really don't like that term. Let's talk about it internally." What he did was he took the higher salary, and then he went public without telling me about it, even though we discussed that specific term in our negotiation. And that's why I was so I was so frustrated. It was just a week. It was just a week before the letter went out. Or not a
Okay.
week, but it was several weeks because we entered negotiation before his contract actually started. So it was like 2 to 3 weeks.
Right. Okay. So another thing I want to ask before we get into the specifics of what happened publicly with him being removed, etc., is he referenced later on when he was removed that he had already talked to you about some of these issues. I mean, he's talking about PEA appointing scoots, etc. And what he referenced was a face-to-face meeting that you had. He said, I think it was like you had lunch or dinner, and it was like a couple of hours long. And he said, you talked about the team and what the role would be. But he makes it sound like you discussed PEA within that, and maybe even this topic that the players will be represented by this, and they'll have to take their own negotiation. Now, before we get into the specifics, from your perspective, what was discussed at that meeting? Like, what was the tone of the meeting? Was it very serious? Was it about these kind of topics? Like, we're going to do this as the players. How would you describe that meeting?
It was honestly our first meeting in person when we just hired him. So it was more of like an introduction, getting to know each other, really just starting off like the year, like what do we want to do in 2017? How are we going to develop players? What does he want to see? Where should we base our gaming house, right? Because he is living in Santa Monica now, but he wants to move back to Orange County, and he like every other player is gonna be in the gaming house, but he's not going to be because he wants to live with a significant other. So it's mainly about like logistics. Where should we place our gaming house? What's gonna help develop the team the best? Do we need analysts? Do we need more coaching staff? What can I do um, for the CS:GO division to improve? Because I'm not hands on with the CS:GO division because I'm not experienced enough to, and I don't have the know-how. So the conversation was about how we can do a better job to perform better. That was most of the conversation. And when he brought up that, hey, like we're using Surskit to represent the players, it was really brief, and we didn't really touch on the topic so much because, if the players want an agent, that's completely fine, right? Like, and that's something he touched on too. Getting an agent is completely fine. An agent should be there to negotiate um, like financial terms. They should negotiate like branding around the players, marketing around the players, what the brand should do for the player, like all those things. But like that's not what's being negotiated. Um, but I was ultimately fine in that in the lunch meeting. We briefly talked about it. He didn't even show me his like he didn't even tell me that he was unhappy about the PA or whatnot. I just found out publicly.
Okay. So then let's get into the specifics of what the part that the public knows at the moment, which is that obviously the letter itself comes out, this PEA letter. It's written by Sir Scoots, but he's representing these 25 players of 5 of the different PEA teams, including your team, and all 5 names of the players are listed there. So all the public knows is the letter comes out, and then seangares comes out, and he basically says in a tweet, like, essentially the gist is, like, I've been fired due to my involvement with that letter. And then he leaks logs of what you and him had said, and he'd said it all through text. And so, first things first, what was your initial reaction when the PEA letter came out?
Well, to be honest with you, I felt kind of betrayed and disappointed, and for 2 reasons. One of the reasons is that's something that we actually discussed privately already. Is that what the players are ultimately doing is they want to fight for control and rights and power, right? But one of the big things is that that's something that we touched on, and I told them like, hey, that is a term that's standard across all esports teams. Like, if they're paying you to play at events and do sponsor activations, right? And promote our sponsors and represent our brand well. That's why you have the paycheck you have. And when he asked for more pay um, to give up on that term, I felt like he agreed to it. That's something that he discussed. He's a big name player. He asked for more pay, and he gave up on that term. That's like a contract. I'm not. He's 28 years old. I'm 24 years old. He has a college degree. I dropped out of high school. Like he went in completely knowing what he signed up for, and then after a week,
Okay.
he didn't discuss it with me. Like I said earlier, he went public and tried to get that term removed. It's like you just got hired at any job. You agreed to what you're supposed to do, and you get paid for it. And then all of a sudden, you tell your employer or whatever it is, hey, I don't want to do the work, but I want to get paid for it. And that's why I was really frustrated. But at the same time, I wanted to be open-minded about it, and I wanted to talk to him about it. But I was really upset because the way they went about it actually was hurting our relationship with our sponsors and was damaging to our brand. And a lot of the community was really dismissive about it. But what ended up happening right away was that there was a really big thread on our personal Reddit, on the TSM Reddit, that was talking about how TSM was mistreating our CS:GO team, that we had a history of doing that we were a terrible organization. And then in the thread on Reddit, for the CS:GO Reddit, there was a big comment saying, guys, we need to do something about this. We need to reach out to every single sponsor that all these organizations have and tell them about this player mistreatment, how they're taking away player rights, how they're terrible, and how like they shouldn't be sponsoring these organizations. And the irony about it is that the players are fighting for control so they can get, better treatment, so they can get paid more. But the way they're going about it is wrong because sponsors and advertisers are 99% of the revenue in esports, and that's how we pay our players. And so when our players go about it doing it in that method, it actually hurts our ability to pay the players. And so, I reached out to Sean and I wanted him to clarify and say, like, this isn't about player rights. This is about us not wanting to play in PA and replacing EPL. I wanted him to clear that up because the hashtag player rights thing led to sponsors not funding our CSGO team anymore really quickly. And that actually financially hurt our company, not just branding wise, it financially hurt our company. And that's the sole reason why I hired Sean, was to get sponsors, was to promote our sponsors. So the very first week of his job, I hired him to do something, and he did the exact opposite. And he also wasn't fulfilling his contract.
Okay. So when you say that part there, like, I noticed this is one of the things where, I mean, I'm sure you'd acknowledge, like, just public speaking is not a strength of yours, okay? So you probably say something sometimes and you don't necessarily explain what you meant by that and assume people knew what you meant. So one thing I think actually, even in your message to seangares, but also in your public message that you didn't really explain very well, is kind of what you just said here. So I want to just check. So when you said, oh, he damaged the brand, and you in fact told seangares this in the log, in the private conversation, you said, you've damaged our brand. And he actually didn't seem to understand what that meant either. Like, he said, oh, you've accused me of damaging the brand. I mean, you've outlined here, like, basically the PEA, the open letter to the PEA then caused fans, for whatever reason, to contact TSM sponsors, and that directly hurt, TSM the org, not just CSGO, presumably, right?
Not just our sponsors, every other sponsor from every other org on that list. And yes, it was also affecting our business within League of Legends too, because it created, like, there are a lot of sponsors that we've been working on for 2 to 3 years, and we're still in conversation with them. And then when they see these type of things, it damages our ability to sell. It damages our relationship within, like, our League of Legends sponsors and also within CS:GO, right? So that's what really actually mattered to me the most. It's not about the PA, it's not about EPL. It's about like, it's hurting our relationship, like, right now, and it's hurting my ability to even pay those players. And yes, my messaging was not very specific. And I didn't want to bring up a sponsor over text because I didn't want the player to feel. I didn't want him to feel like, oh, the sponsor has a problem with you. I wanted to hop on a call with him and be able to explain to him. There's never been an instance in my history of being, like, a team owner where I've had a problem hopping on a call with any player. Like, when I reached out to the other 4 players over messages, they responded to me. When I asked them to hop on a call with me, they all were there within, like, a day. They're like, yeah, let's hop on a call. Let's discuss it. In any case, every other team, I've never, ever had a problem hopping on a call with a player. And my intent was to not talk about PA. It's not about to fight with him over, like, EPL PA. It's really about making sure that he understands what he signed up for. And the reason why I responded, like, aggressively was because that was what we negotiated on. It was, like, for him to be a leader, for him to teach our other players how to act, right? I didn't expect him to do a tweet that that was that, like, aggressive towards our company. And so, yeah, I didn't do a good job explaining myself over text. I just thought that he was going to hop on a call with me, and he didn't want to hop on a call with me. And so I felt like he betrayed my trust by doing that letter, because that's something we already negotiated on. It wasn't something that he signed up a year ago. It was something that he signed up a week before the letter went out. So knowingly, he wanted more pay, and he released that letter anyways. And so I felt like he betrayed my trust, and so I wanted to create urgency. I was like, hey, look, like, do you want to leave our brand? Like, you signed up for this contract. Are you trying to use the public to, leverage this against me to get out of your contract? What are you doing? So that's why I sent the message saying, like, hey, look, are you unhappy you're part of our brand? Do you want to leave? Generally in esports, if you sign a player to a contract, we have to pay the player that salary, whether they perform or not perform, right? And I didn't know what he wanted. I wanted him to tell me what he wanted, and I just assumed that he wasn't unhappy being part of our brand because he wouldn't talk to me. So it's like, hey, do you want to leave? I'll let you leave for free.
Okay.
Every other esports organization would look to sell their player contract, trade them for another player, because that's the business element of esports, right? You invest into something and you expect a return. I felt like it was a one week relationship. It was already not going well. Our trust was already broken, and I felt like, hey, maybe it's just better to part ways than actually to try to make a relationship work when it's already so rocky.
Okay.
And even after that, like even after he said like, hey, we should terminate amicably, I reached out to the other four players. I told them they really wanted to play with Sean. So I was like, hey, look, if you guys explain to him the situation about what we just discussed in this call, if you explain to him why it just damaged our sponsors and why it hurt the TSM brand, and because you guys see it from my perspective now, if you guys convince him to apologize to me about what he did, then I'm completely fine with this, with us making amends, forgetting about this whole subject, and all we need to do is just hop on a call so we can talk about it, so we can understand each other's tone. And right after that call, what he did was right after that call, the players reached out to him, talked to Sean, and then Sean didn't want to fix the relationship. He just released the logs publicly, and that. I even have proof of the players saying that they reached out to him, and then him just like releasing the logs.
Okay.
And then at that point, there's no possible way I can fix my relationship with him. But I would say that I did try. I think I should have given more time. I reacted a little bit emotionally, but I just felt like things were going completely in the wrong direction when you're starting a new relationship. And I felt like our lunch meeting was positive, and I felt like that whole incident came right like out of left field. I didn't see it coming at all.
Okay. So here's the question then. So as you just said there, with the order of events that happened there, like you felt as though you couldn't repair the relationship at that point in time, if he publicly leaks the logs when you're still trying to like potentially repair the relationship. So this is one of the things that a lot of people were outraged about when he came out and said he was essentially fired over the letter, is that, yeah, they think he was fired because of involvement with the letter and that Reginald was unreasonable, okay? So you can't really know what would have happened if he had gotten onto a call with you and done a quick call at any point during the process. But if you could speculate, if you'd have been able to talk to him over voice, do you think it would have been different than if it was just over text and the way the method of communication you had to go through this way? Do you think it would have been resolved?
100%, because I think that the messaging that Sean, the way Sean's typing and talking to me isn't just him, right? He's refusing to talk to me because he doesn't want to be convinced. He feels like I'm trying to convince him to be a part of the PA, but that's not my goal. My goal was to talk about our brand, our sponsors, how we're going to work together in the future. I just wanted to hop on a call with him to be able to talk to him, right? Because how he works with me right now, I mean, in that instance, is going to set the tone of our relationship of how we're going to work together forever, right? Agents are, like I said, used to negotiate contracts and business terms on how like the player's branding should be used, on how the contract should be operated. But when I want to talk to him about how we should work together, from like a company to like player relationship, I feel like he should feel like he has a duty to like have to talk to me, But that wasn't the case. Sorry, can you repeat your question? I don't know if I answered it.
I mean, I think you answered part of it. Okay, so you said there, like, maybe you should have given it more time. I mean, I realize with the PEA letter coming out, and if, as you say, it's true that people were already contacting sponsors of TSM and the other players, the other organizations, yeah, it's true. There is a time component there. You can't just sit around and wait forever to deal with it. But in a perfect world, like, should you have waited like a week, or should you have had a few more days? I mean, here's the thing. As much as, yeah, you're his boss and he probably should communicate with you, it was also, like around Christmas and it is the holidays. What would you say to this topic?
Man, they chose to release the letter on Christmas Day, right? I didn't get to spend any time with my family at all. I had to really focus on this whole situation. At the end of the day, I felt like I reacted emotionally. I should have given it more thought. It's more than just Sean at this point, and I definitely felt like I was emotional in some aspect, but I would have to say that they chose to release the letter on right before Christmas, and that's something that's really negative, right? Because if you look at it from just the business aspect of it, during the holidays is when consumers and like our audience and customers like spend the most amount of dollars on like sponsored products. Wouldn't you agree? That's why advertising dollars are much higher in these months. And it's actually not really good for these players to release something that negative around brands in the first place, because it actually does affect the way we operate with sponsors. Of course, the players aren't going to think about it from a business perspective because that's not what they're specialized at. But I think that experience is put on their agent and their manager, right? A good agent and a good manager will make sure that when they're entering business negotiation with an organization to increase player rights, increase player compensation, and give them more power, they should make sure that they're not damaging the entire ecosystem, the pie, right? If the players handled it correctly, they did things the right way, they could have entered negotiations with these organizations and exerted their leverage in a positive way, where we're fighting for what we think is fair, and I feel like they should fight for what they think is fair first. And if negotiations break down privately, then they should leverage. Even if then they should start leveraging like the public against us. But leveraging the public against, you know, like leveraging the public in the way they did just hurt everyone. It hurt the organization. It hurt advertisers. It hurts investors. Like looking into the scene, people are not going to want to invest in the scene when players act that way. But I feel like yes, I think that I should have waited to answer your question. I think that I should have been able to take the hit, just drop it, and then refocus and talk about it over Christmas. I reacted really quickly because I felt like it was really urgent. The reason why TSM has been successful is because we are able to sign top tier sponsors and keep them because we treat the sponsors well, right? There are two elements to esports. You have to have good performing teams, and you also have to treat the sponsors well. You have to have strong account managers. Esports isn't just about the players. There's a lot of staff working behind the scenes. For every single 2 players we have a full-time person working on the background to make sure that they're doing their social media, to make sure that we do the video around the sponsors, to make sure that we're constantly communicating with their sponsors. And there's all that stuff behind the scenes, and their job is also directly affected in how the players act publicly, right? So I think that they're not thinking about these things when they're taking that approach.
Okay, so one aspect of this that I want to check about is within the log to seangares, you actually say something along the lines of like, okay, you know what, we'll drop PEA, like we'll just work to stay in EPL and we'll figure out some sort of revenue share with EPL, or we'll get them to share the profits somehow. Like that you said that in the DMs. You never actually had to do it, but this would have happened. Like if he'd have agreed, okay, like yeah, oh, right, we'll hop on the call, we'll figure it all out. This is something TSM would do. They would just drop PA entirely because like the other PA owners, like Noah Winston, in his response to the open letter, he makes it more like we'll give you the choice of which you do. But you're saying like if it's so important to Seangares, you literally TSM would drop PA and just do EPL.
Yeah, we wouldn't compete if the players don't want to play in the PA league. Then we won't. But and that even like on top of that too, he agreed by the contract he signed to play in the leagues we chose. Like there's one thing that I want to touch on is that all my players under my team did not give me any shit when we got them into ECS. When we got them into ECS, the community was outraged. They're really upset that the players that were on our team got into an invite into ECS at the caliber of how they were playing. When we got into E-League, people were also upset that we got invited into E-League. And I fought hard, and I reached out to these tournament organizers to convince them why it's important to have our brand win their league. I committed, when I had conversations with these leagues, I told them how much we plan to invest in the CSGO scene, how we plan to invest over $1 million in the next 2 years over in CSGO, how we're dedicated to getting a gaming house, hiring staff, hiring coaching staff, hiring analysts, making sure that the players have what it takes to compete, right? And the sad thing is that we failed. We didn't do a good job. But I want people to take out of all this is that we are committed for the long run. Sure, we lost this year. Sure, we didn't do well this year. But we're still we still planned on like supporting the scene and pushing forward to continue to grow our roster and our brand within the CSGO scene. And I felt like our players going out there to make a really big deal about EPL was really disappointing, right? Because they haven't actually qualified into any league off their own merits at all. They didn't qualify into ECS. They didn't qualify into E-League. And the second time around, when we went play to the qualifiers, I actually don't think that we made it very far. And now those have to do with the other 4 players. With Sean being included as a new member to the team, where we're still qualifying into EPL. Right now, we have to play in EPL with FNS and Cephas, which was going to be replaced by Shazam and Sean. even if we do qualify into EPL, it wouldn't even be off of Sean's merits. And on top of that, he agreed to play in the league that we were going to choose. Despite all that, I wanted to give the players what they wanted because they felt so strongly about it. So I was like, okay, fine. If you want to play in EPL, fine. It doesn't matter. Play in EPL, but don't make our sponsors look bad. Don't hurt our brand. That's all I wanted to accomplish out of this, and
Okay.
I wasn't able to get that.
So here's a question then that people will say. They will say, well, in that case, if you offered this after the public letter came out and there was all these problems and you were trying to just solve the problems, people will say, then doesn't that mean what the players did worked? Like, would you really have offered them this if they'd have come to you privately instead of releasing the letter?
Of course. I mean, you have to think it from you have to also think of from a business perspective, right? Sure, the community is going to get upset at me, and you know, sure they're going to be frustrated. But the truth is, I personally feel like the PA is such a big investment from the owners, where it's going to be such a long-term investment, anyways. And if the community is that volatile, and if the players are that volatile, it's not worth it actually to host the PA tournament. And this is actually my opinion, not the PA's opinion.
Okay.
The PA's opinion is compromised of several other owners, right? I feel like if the community is going to encourage players to break contracts, encourage players to not do the work and services they promise, then it sets a really bad precedent for the future. Wouldn't you agree? Like, so far, I just signed a player. He, attacked our brand. He's still getting paid till today over Christmas, by the way. So far, we signed these players. They agreed to all these terms. All they focus on is compensation. We just re-signed a lot of the players. We just signed Shazam. We just signed seangares. We just re-signed pretty much all of our other players. And all they do is focus on compensation. They're like, okay, well, how can I get paid more? If I do this, can I get paid more? I'm like, sure, of course, you can get paid more if you do these. So we agree to paying them more. They don't do the services. We still pay them anyways, Thorin. That's a serious issue I have right now. And then
Okay.
what's bad is that the community is encouraging this behavior. And if this behavior is encouraged, then what's going to happen is that, sure, players are going to have all the power right now, but through time, investors will see this and they'll be like, okay, I got to pull my investment because this is not healthy. And then that's not good. Players should be more reasonable of what they can do, demand salaries that they demand salaries and like services that they can actually provide, and then that would be more fair. If they want control, fine. Like, they should forgo their premium salary.
Okay.
That's what I think is fair. We like it. It's a long-term partnership, and I want to work together with them, but they can't expect us to take all the risks and not do the services they promise.
Right. So one last topic I had on the seangares issue was this another part that made it, I think, look very bad in public was where you used the term manipulation. You implied that he manipulated the other four players into signing the letter, being a part of the letter, and then obviously you released like partial logs of those players sort of saying like, oh, I didn't really read it, or I didn't really know what it was, or, I just went along with what Sean said. Now, can you explain what you meant by this, like when you said that? Because if you say that, if people think, right, that Reginald has not given his players the choice, then he's fired this guy for speaking out who's the leader, and then he says that he's manipulated him. It sounds to the public like you're trying to scapegoat seangares, like you're trying to say he did it all, the other players were totally innocent, they didn't do anything. Like, what would you say about this? What did you mean by manipulation?
So I think that that's a really aggressive word, and I probably should have a better choice of words because at that time, I can only make decisions based on knowledge, right? And so, yeah, to give you context, the conversation I had with Sean was before I had conversations with every other player, and then I really wanted to get down to see like why Sean is behaving the way he's behaving. He agreed. Like I'm repeating myself, but I want to make this one really clear. He agreed to do something, he didn't do it. And then he refused to talk to me. He was really standoffish, and it made me feel really bad. So I wanted to get to the bottom of it. I reached out to Shazam, and they gave off the impression that they didn't know what was going on. I reached out to some of the other players. They gave off the impression that they didn't know what was going on. So that's day one. Day two, I find out my sponsors are all being approached by like the community, which I think was like a really negative thing to do. And they were just like straight trashing on TSM, and that's I guess that's something that the community doesn't see. That's why they're surprised on why I was acting the way I was acting. And so, based on the information I had, I came to the conclusion that Sean was manipulating the players. If the players weren't actually manipulated, then they threw Sean under the bus. But besides that point, that was just another thing on why he completely lost my trust. He had already lost my trust, and our relationship was already rocky after the first conversation. But after finding out that our sponsors were their approach, and also after finding out that all these players said that Sean, made this whole thing up, I then messaged him, was like, dude, what the hell's going on? Like, do you want to leave? I can look for a replacement. That's why I reacted that way. I reacted that way based on the information I had and what the community was doing with all the threads on our Reddit and also the contact of our sponsors. So that's day two when I messaged Sean that. And, I gave him the option to contact me that day. Had he not contacted me, I would have actively looked for a replacement because that's not even a focus I want to have with our organization. We've been an underperforming team for the last year. I want to focus on how we can do better. I wanted to move the CSGO team closer to me in LA so I can have weekly conversations with them and go to their house to be hands-on. Despite our team having a manager, a coach, and another manager, I wanted to be more hands-on because I think it's important. Even though I feel like I'm not experienced, I wouldn't be able to add value. I think it's important for me I thought it was important for me to have at least some context on what's going on with our CSGO team. So I made the conscious decision to move them to LA. I just wanted 2017 to be all about focusing on performance, right? If you look at esports at the end of the day and economics, our team didn't make one major. That's how CSGO teams make money. Our team didn't make one major. And on top of that, they're not popular too. So we activate very little around sponsors. And so if we don't win, none of this matters anyways. So like PA, sure, if we were able to build it into a really good league and get sponsors several years down the road, then that could be something that makes money. But if I can't even get my team to act appropriately and win, then that league doesn't even matter. So that's why my focus is around how do I stop the situation from damaging our sponsors outside of our CSGO ecosystem, and how do I get my players to actually just focus on winning? I feel like other teams, sure, they're a top-performing team like Optic, TL, Cloud9, sure, that's what they should be focusing on because they want to maximize what they already have. They want to maximize their popularity. They want to maximize, their brand power. So they want to like push for power rights, right? If you look at it from like a smaller team like TSM and CSGO, we don't have any of that. We are not a good performing team, and I think that's a very fair statement to make. I'm not trying to throw our players under the bus and say that they're bad, but we have to accept that in order to improve. We're bad now, but the reason why I'm investing into this scene in the long run because I feel like if we do things right, eventually we could perform. If you look at Optic 2 years ago, look at where they're at now. Isn't it a crazy transformation? Hector did everything right. I did everything wrong. And so I need to look at Optic to see what I need to improve on. And if I have the mindset, if I'm dedicated, consistent, I felt like eventually through time I would be able to replicate some sort of success. That's how I built my company. I made mistakes, but I learned from them. And I grew up in esports, and that's how I made my company. So I wanted to take that approach. I wanted to focus on just pure competition. So that's why being a part of any league didn't matter to me. Sure, maybe when we're bigger, but not right now.
Okay, so one of the things that's interesting about this scenario as well is it sounds like the same thing played out, which is you had this discussion with your players. I mean, you have the logs of that, and they're saying in the private one-on-ones, like, oh, maybe I didn't know exactly what the letter said, or I just agreed with what Sean said. But then they themselves come out and make a public statement, and even though they were they were very careful in how they worded it, we don't want to disrespect TSM, all this sort of stuff. They did then sort of go almost against what they said in private, right? I mean, they then sort of implied that we are all unified behind this letter. It's what did you think of that? What was the reaction to that?
I have to take some fault too, right? I think even though Sean released the logs, I think that I should have been the bigger man there and not released other players' logs, because I think that at the end of the day, even though trying to prove that I wasn't the malicious person in this instance, I felt like I should have protected our players from the public, and I think that because I released those logs, I betrayed their trust. Now, when I released those logs, I did hop on a call with them, and I was like, hey guys, I have to release this to protect myself because a lot of things that he's saying isn't true.
Yeah.
And even though they disagreed with the method, they understood why I did it, so they ended up giving me the blessing. But so they basically said, yeah, you could do it, but I just want you to know we're gonna be really unhappy about this. And because we did that, and because there's a lot of pressure on those other players to side with the other players, they're going to have to react the way they're going to react. They're going to have to protect the players because you have to understand all these players are working together to try to get more power, and I think that's important for them. I actually really want them to get a proper agent. I really want them to get former players union in the right way because I think it would actually be more beneficial for the organizations in the long term. I think the way they went about it was actually negative for every single party. The players are not going to get what they want with the method they use. The team owners obviously are going to suffer. The sponsors are going to suffer. And I think the players are going to suffer at the end of the day because if all those other, like, it's important for all these other, like, people to be successful. And if these other guys are not successful, the players aren't going to be successful either. The players are going to be successful. More sponsors come in, more investment comes in, and their salaries increase. They should have really stuck by the finances. They should have really stuck by business terms. They shouldn't have escalated from 0 to 100 like within a day. Is what I'm saying.
Okay.
But yes, sorry for going off topic. The other players, I felt like they're just trying to defend Sean. I mean, they have to look out for the best interest. They want to play with Sean because he's a reputable game leader. They've been doing really well in scrims. They've been performing well with Sean, and he was the direction that they needed. And so they want to stick by him. They feel like with Sean, they would be able to perform well. So that's why they want to stick by him. So yeah.
Okay, so we talked about like the North American TSM team and the recent seangares situation, but another topic that I want to discuss with you, because obviously this is for the CSGO community, was what happened when you had the Danish lineup in TSM. So obviously most of them, the core of the lineup is now Astralis, and yeah, they had at certain times in 2016 where they weren't doing so well, but now they're back to being one of the best teams. They've been in a lot of big finals recently. So I want to go back in time. When you first signed this team, it was obviously actually the first TSM CSGO team. You signed them when they used to be the Dignitas team. It was in early 2015. And from the outside, for people who only look at what happens inside the game server, okay, they only look at results and how well a team plays, they're going to think, as you will have seen with a lot of community discussion, if a team is doing really well in the server, then yeah, they should have the most money and they should have they should get the best cut of the prize money. They should get all the rewards from that. So when you signed this team clearly, from basically the very beginning of being in TSM, had success. Started winning tournaments, top fours all the time. So from the outside, it looks like how could the TSM Orc have any problem with this team? I mean, this should be one of the best teams you could have. So how would you explain like the initial scenario of bringing them on board, and then how did things start to go wrong? 'Cause it seems like it wasn't too long after you signed them that there were already some problems.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that things went negative pretty quickly with that team. So let me provide some context. We picked up, at that time in the CSGO ecosystem, players are only being paid like $500 to $1,000 per month in Europe, right? And all the North American teams they're just playing at zero compensation, and organizations were just paying for travel. So that's where the ecosystem was at. No one was getting paid. Everyone was playing CSGO part-time. Some of the top-tier European teams were able to do it full-time because of how good they were. Like NIP, they're winning like everything. And so at that time, compensation was really, really little. And so when we went in, we actually increased compensation above all board because we were super aggressive with getting into the scene. So we pushed prizing percentages to an all-time high. Like we took like almost no percentage. It was like really little. I think 10%. And with sticker percentages, some teams were being paid. Some players were being paid 0%, and some players were being paid 50% on the high end. When we went in, we were the first team to offer 70% to all players. And on top of that, too, the salaries that our players were getting, it was also one of the highest salaries and most aggressive salaries at that time. And you have to think about this, right? It wasn't that simple. We have to talk about the negotiation process within what happened. When we were
Okay.
negotiating with the Astralis team, they went back and forth from us and 3 other organizations. At that time, Astralis was talking to TSM. They were talking to they were talking to Dignitas, their former organization. They were talking to like 3 or 4 other organizations, and they wanted to go with the best and highest offer possible. So they put
Okay.
all the organizations against each other to just have a huge bidding war, which is completely fine because they're looking out for their best interest. They wanted the best pay, and during that negotiation, as their pay increased, um the expectation of what they needed to do also increased, right? Now it's really important to note that esports teams right now in this current day don't make money to how traditional sports teams make money. When in soccer and football and all those other sports, when players compete, they make money. Like basically going to a tournament or competing on a broadcast. That's how players make money in traditional sports. In esports, tournament organizers make money. So ESL, DreamHack, whoever hosted the tournament, they make the money off the broadcasting rights. So teams and players teams are only able to make money through sponsorships. That's why I put that. That's why they're so important to this ecosystem. That's why not only just TSM but every other team owner is so protective around their sponsors, and they make sure that they treat them at the very best they can. And it's really important for players to also be good brand ambassadors. And so as their pay increased in that negotiation, their hours of streaming and doing sponsored content also increased, right? It's like, if you want more pay, then you got to do more things. So other organizations were also being really competitive. They're negotiating streaming hours down, they're negotiating their pay up, etc. Whoever offered them the most appealing package were able to get them. And we were able to offer the most aggressive package to get them. So regardless if they went to TSM or not, they would have had to sign a contract where they get paid a premium salary to do certain services. Now, where things really went wrong is that when TSM went into the CSGO scene, we also got a title sponsor for our CSGO team. And that sponsor was Kingwin. They are an awesome company. They supported us. And I would say in this case, our team let them down. We started to perform really well, and our players knew that they had certain expectations to hit. They fulfilled less than 20% of their contract obligation, but we still paid them. Even in our contract, we have the ability to fine them if they don't do sponsor work. But we actually wanted to operate correctly, and we paid them their full salary anyways, even when Kingwin decided to drop out because the CSGO team did not do what they promised. So, and then not only did our CSGO team drop out, but other sponsors started to pull funding from our CSGO team too because they didn't do it. It's really important that, in this interview, the community starts to better understand the economics around esports, right?
Sure.
But the players promised to do it's similar to this situation. The players promised to do certain things. They didn't do it. They weren't using our sponsor's product even, and that was like a really negative experience for me. But at the same time, the players were looking out for their best interests, right? It's really important to balance it. But esports, as you know today, players and organizations only make money through sponsor activations. Super important to note. The players focused on performance. The performance was really good. It made our brand look good. Don't get me wrong, that was awesome. And that's why I continued to pay them, even though we were losing business and TSM was on the hook for more and more money. Think about it, right? If we come in this ecosystem like with the expectation to pay a certain amount, we were ready to pay it. But you have to think, this budget that we had, we were losing this budget. So it basically came out of my own pocket now to pay the players with the money I actually made from streaming of my personal money, streaming, not the company's money, my personal money. Like this money was made through other games, and so I started to have a really negative relationship with the players, right? But at the same time, I was a player myself, and the players wanted to focus on performance, and so performance was really important to them, and performance is also really important for our brand because that's what we focus on. We actually, on the League of Legends side, we actually focus on doing less sponsor work. If you look at this last year, we gave up. Our players streamed like less than 5 hours per month on the League of Legends side to focus on performance because performance is really important to me because that's what I was passionate about. And that's why I started my company in the first place. I started my company as a player. So when the Danish squad came to me and they were like, "Hey, Andy, I want to really focus on performance. Can I not do these sponsor things?" I was like, "Fine, don't do it for this time, but make it up later." But the thing is that it never ended up being made up. So we had all these things that they had to do, but they didn't end up doing it. So I wasn't able to bring on more sponsors to increase their pay when current sponsors were already dropping. And so it put me in a negative situation because at the end of the day, I have to also treat it as a business, right? I have to be able to grow it so that the players get paid. but because the players had such aggressive percentages on winning and performing, they focused on that. Now they're looking for the best. They're looking for their best interests, so that makes
Yeah.
sense. And it's also good for our brand somewhat too, so that makes sense. But it's really important to know that in order to be a successful organization, there needs to be balances. You need to perform well. You need to be a good brand ambassador. If you perform really well, but you're not a good brand ambassador, sponsors are not going to sponsor you. There's a lot of people in traditional sports that don't have nearly as many endorsements as other players do because they're not as good of a brand ambassador, right?
Sure.
Unfortunately, in esports right now, that's just how the business model works. And so things got to be really bad with our team because um, they didn't fulfill their services, which I felt like behind the scenes, that's a really fair reason for me to, um, look to part ways with our CSGO team. And we let them go out of their contract 3 months early. Again, we didn't look for a buyout. I think where things went really poorly and we got most of the heat on was really around the social media, where to some degree I do think that we dropped the ball on. Sorry for
Okay.
that long explanation.
You got to a lot of stuff there. Okay, right. Let's pick apart some of this stuff then. So when you're saying here about like the economics of how a team works, etc., and like as you're saying here, since you had to bid against other teams, obviously what you were bidding against in this sense was like who's going to offer the most money for the least obligations and who's going to offer like better rates for the stickers. These are the things that the players cared about. And at the time, I know the sticker rate was an incredibly big one because all players who were very good thought, right, I'm going to get into the top 8 of the major, so I want to get all my as much money as I can there. Okay, so the problem here is it seems quite clear, which is if the player thinks Reginald's going to let him off his sponsor obligations, then he doesn't have to do that part. So then maybe he does spend more time practicing or thinking about the tournament. And if he wins the tournament, as TSM's CSGO team did, he gets that money. He gets most of the prize money because his deal is he gets a lot of the prize money. So to him, it's almost like there's a positive reinforcement for not doing the sponsor obligations, right? Because, I mean, sure, he doesn't want to get fired, but in a weird way, if Reginald's letting him off, then he's going to think, right, well, I'm getting more money by doing better in this tournament. Do you think the players understood how important the sponsor obligations were?
I tried to explain it to them, right? But I don't think that they understood, and that's why I think it's really important for players to have agents because when they're negotiating the contract, they're going to negotiate what makes sense for the industry because they want the industry to be better. If the industry grows, the agent will get bigger commissions in the future. But I try to make it really clear. I just don't think that many people know how esports works behind the scene, and that's why I think like during this interview, a lot of people are going to be more understanding of why we made the decisions we made. But I try to make it clear. I was like, hey, look, the only reason why you guys are being paid is because of these things. But you have to keep in mind, right? Players can look out for their best interest. If they're going to get paid, their full salary anyways, without any negative consequences, then they're going to do that and also make more money focusing on their events completely. And I think that's also why, like, organizations are looking for tournaments to provide support, right? If players they want to prefer, if they want to focus on performance more, and they strictly want to focus on performance, then their salary and how they get paid needs to come from somewhere, right? A mix. It needs to be a balance and a mix of both. I just don't think that we were able to hit that balance. Sorry for mixing up my words.
Okay.
But yes, I made it really important when we signed the contract. I expressed how important it was to do it. The players understood their obligations, and they didn't do it. But it doesn't make sense for me to just go out in public and say like, hey, like these players aren't doing this. Like all I have to do is to blame myself, right? Like so that's why I didn't bother to explain like it from my standpoint. I didn't really want to say, hey, I hired these players and they didn't do their job. So I didn't really bother to address it. But looking back on it, I think that was really silly of me. I think that I should have given an explanation to why things went the way they went with our CSGO team, because we're still getting a lot of flack about it today. Some of the things are warranted around the social media. Some of them are not.
So, okay, one of the issues with the team in this sense of how much salary they were making and how well they were doing in the server as well, but then the fact that they weren't able to meet the sponsor obligations is that I remember there were other European teams who were doing very well during this year in the server as well. They were also, top four teams winning tournaments. And I know that as the year went on, salaries increased. Inflation was incredible. And so one of the things that happened was a lot of these other teams actually re-signed their teams. They went to, you can insert the name here. If you can think of a popular European CS team, they almost all re-signed their team, okay? And what they would do is re-sign the team, sure, and they would give them a higher salary, and they say, you guys are doing so well, rather than you guys just leave at the end of your contract and go to some new company and just make a thing there, we'll stick with you, we'll got a relationship here. Did your team expect the same thing? Like you said at the beginning, okay, they got a much better salary when they joined TSM. By the time this sort of thing's happening that I'm describing, they weren't the number one salary. In fact, they even said publicly, they weren't even, I think they said they weren't even top 5 or something. Were they expecting that despite not doing their sponsor obligation, they were going to get a raise?
Yes.
But that was not tenable? That couldn't happen?
It didn't happen because, I made the conscious business decision not to, right? It didn't make sense for me to even invest more money into the scene when sponsors were dropping out for that specific team. Now other teams are better in brand ambassadors than others. Our team performed better than other teams, right? And they played to their strengths. The way I negotiated the contract, though, the players benefit a lot more from performance. And, the other things they had to do was basically the reason why they were being paid. So, to answer your question, the reason why I didn't want to re-sign them was because I didn't think that with the way the ecosystem was going, that it was sustainable. Right? I bootstrapped my business with $5,000. I made a network of websites, and I then used that network of websites with advertising dollars to fund my esports business, and that's how I grew it. And I still own 100% of my esports business to this day. But we actually are coming out with a stock program to give employees stock and also some players stock. But besides that point, what I really want to address is that it's a problem with the ecosystem, because it's not a problem with the ecosystem. That's just what happens when the ecosystem is growing, right? It's really volatile right now. There's not a set way on how to conduct business. A lot of the teams right now are coming in and dying. Some of them come in and come out. There's 40, 50 brands to follow. But the big thing to take away from this is that a lot of the traditional top tier brands, how they're able to pay their players is what they're doing is they're selling a piece of their company. They're selling equity in their company to pay the players, right? Yeah. And so through time, because it's unsustainable right now, they're going to actually lose their business if they stick with that model. Because there's a lot of other people that are looking to enter the industry because it's super hot. A lot of people don't understand the economics. They are also willing to invest a much higher dollar amount because it is entertainment. If I was some rich dude and I wanted to invest into some technology company, most of the time that technology company is going to fail, and you don't really even get to see the benefits of it, right? But if you invest into an esports business nowadays, not only do you have something that's yours, but it's something to root for. That's your team, right? That's why billionaires invest into basketball and stuff. They do it as a hobby. They don't make most of their money through when they bought their team, right? A lot of 100 millionaires became billionaires because of how big basketball grew. But a lot of them were self-made through other businesses before. Yeah. For esports, people are investing into esports right now with the hopes for it to be really, really, really big. And that's why they're paying salaries and not requiring certain obligations, because they're willing to lose money for the long run. Now, how long? I don't know, because I don't know how rich these guys are. But for TSM, it didn't make sense with our business model. It didn't make sense. If we are losing sponsors and the pay is constantly increasing, it didn't make sense at all. So I decided to focus on learning how to develop talent. I wanted that to be a main focus of TSM, because if I got to the point where I can bet on a young guy and develop them to make them into a top performing player, then that's something that's invaluable. That's something I can constantly do. So no matter how rich someone comes in, they can't just take away that ability that I've learned. To say a billionaire comes in, a billionaire makes more interest in half a year than I would ever make in my lifetime, by the way. So they can just take any player they want from me when my contracts expire, right? So I wanted to take a more sustainable route, and that's why I did the things I did. At TSM, the reason why we've been the top performer, or one of the top performers, I don't want to be sound cocky, is because I've been able to pivot and be smart about my business. I can't just outright just spend more money than everyone in this ecosystem. There's I'm not nearly the richest guy in this ecosystem, man. And And it made a lot more sense for those players to sign to an organization to get a really premium salary, to own a stake in that VC company without having to do as many sponsor obligations. Like, they don't have any sponsors right now. Who's paying their salaries? The rich dude that owns them. And he's fine with that. If he's fine with that, that's good for them. I'm happy for those players that they're in a better place. They get paid a lot of money. They don't have to do anything outside of focus on completely playing. And one day I want esports to be like that too, where there's sponsor obligations are, like, the players can do that and make even more money, but at the same time, focus on their performance. The one big thing this all goes back to is that the players that are signing contracts with sustainable esports teams are signing themselves up for things that they're not able to fulfill. Like, if they don't want to do as much, don't ask for as much, right? If they're promising to do all these things, and then they want that big salary, but when it comes down to it, they're not willing to do it. Now, I don't want to generalize, because some players do it, and those are awesome players, and some players don't. The guys that don't, that's not a good way to operate. Like, that's not a good way to make people want to work with you in the long run. For our CSGO guys, though, I understood why they didn't do the obligations, and I'm not upset about it. They're all really good guys. They all talked to me. They all addressed their problems, and they were looking out for their best interests. And for the most part, outside of the social debacle, I felt like I was really fair with them. Let them go out of the contract early. They got a way better offer. I was like, okay, take it. Like, I'm happy for you guys, and I'm going to take my own route, which I thought was also fair. I just didn't think that, and I understand why the community's upset at me too. I mean, I let go of one of the best CS:GO teams, in CS:GO in the last couple of years, right? Of course I should take shit for that. But the thing is that I want to be in esports for the next 5 to 10 years, and I can't just win every single battle. I want not 5, 10 years. I want to be in esports forever. I can honestly say that. I grew up in esports. I started off as a player. I started my business. I want to be in esports forever, and I can't just win every battle by just signing a paycheck. Like, I can't, and that needs to be clear. And every other team too that that doesn't have hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever can't either.
Okay. So you've touched on it a number of times, but probably the worst aspect in terms of PR, in terms of how even TSM fans might think about this era with the Danish team, because like as we're kind of having to explain here, since a lot of fans and even pro players don't necessarily know the mechanics of how the industry works, like what the mechanisms are of how a team makes money, and therefore what the most important thing to do is, they will just look at results. And so a TSM fan will look and see, we lost one of the best teams, I had a team that maybe could have won a major, and now I've got a team that isn't even getting into majors. And so then when this whole scenario happened with the manager of the team who was let go, it made it seem like TSM totally mishandled the way that CSGO team went. So here's the question I want to ask to begin with is, when I actually read the statement by the manager, Frederick Bischoff, the Danish manager of the team, he's actually still with Astralis at this point in time. And after he left TSM, he went off and became basically the agent of those players and helped them get the deal, if they were going to go to another org, or they turned out to make their own org in the end. So with this individual, he said in his public statement something along the lines of like, he'd worked for TSM. He was on kind of like a trial basis, and his contract was going to end. I think the date was August 18th. And then at that point, he thought, right, if everything's gone well, I'm going to become a full-time member. I'm going to become like a full manager. I'm going to get a pay raise. And at the time, he made some comments along the lines of like, he wasn't getting paid very much in this period. And then obviously he didn't get re-signed. He left the team. He became the agent of the players, and he wasn't part of TSM anymore. Now, that's been said by some people publicly. Reginald fired him. Like, Reginald was not happy with the way he was doing things, like, for example, not doing social media enough, and he just fired him, like, you're not doing your job well enough. And as a result, the guy went off, became the agent, and got the guys out of TSM, and they went to Astralis. Now, what would you say about what the situation was with Frederick?
Yeah, that's like a really long question. Let me try to be concise without, going off topic.
Okay.
So I think the big thing that really broke down in communication was, so let's address the social media first, right? Us as TSM, we do social media in a really different way, and that's why our engagement on our Twitter is much higher than every other team. We want to post really interesting stuff. We don't want to spam our audience as much. If you go to TSM's Twitter, we have a lot less tweets than every other organization. So when we tweet about something, we want it to matter. We want it to be interesting. So one of the requirements we had for him as a manager was to take like pictures instead of just tweets, like just text tweets. And I was like, it's actually better for you to not tweet text tweets than um, than have something at all, right? So it's better to not have something at all than actually just tweet out, oh, they're playing right now, because we wanted the engagement to grow on our social media versus a lot of the engagement on other social media teams are just dying. Um, and so that was a requirement, and it was really difficult for him to the requirement because he wanted to focus on making sure that the players had everything they needed at the events. He didn't want to focus on social media as much. And so when we brought that up internally, he's like, "Hey, Andy, look, I want to focus on making sure the players wake up on time, making sure they're well fed, making sure they have everything they need, making sure they feel as confident as possible to perform. So I'm going to put social media as my second priority." I'm like, "Okay, look, that's fine, but I expect you to hit like a minimum at least when you're at these events when you do have time off, because you have to keep in mind as a player and as a manager, I've gone through every single job you can imagine in esports. I know what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, and it got to the point where he wasn't able to do it, and there was a lot of community backlash. Ironically, you were the one to bring up this topic, and it was very fair because from an outsider standpoint, you're not able to look inside how our company operates, so you're not able to see what's going on. All you see is that TSM is mistreating their team because they're not tweeting about them. So we had a really specific requirement for Frederick to hit, and he wasn't able to hit it, and he prioritized the players' treatment first, which we were fine as an organization too, until we started to get attacked publicly about it. So internally, we wanted to fix it, but it just wasn't as consistent as the community wanted, and so that's where things like started to get really negative for the community. Now at that time, you have to keep in mind our company was really small, and it's still a small company. At that time, it was only me still running the company as a CEO and also working with the league team, and they weren't performing as well. And then there's Lena and there's Dan, right? And then there's Frederick. So our company is a tiny company, so you have to keep in mind we bootstrapped our company. We're a tiny company. We're trying to grow it, so we didn't have that much staff, and so a lot of our staff, had to do certain roles. I felt like because Lena was able to manage this League of Legends team, which is really intensive. Frederick was too, but at the same time, he had different priorities, and we weren't able to work it out.
Okay.
So that answers the social media question.
Yeah.
The other question was firing our
Was
manager.
he fired?
So
Did you fire him?
we actually didn't re-sign him. I mean, it was a long time ago, so I don't remember specifics, logs, and whatnot. I don't even want to go on record for it. For the most part, I think we ended the relationship amicably. I'm really happy for Frederick. He's leading Astralis. They're doing great. I want them to be successful. I like the Danish guys. Outside of some comments, they didn't really say anything negative about us. I know that the players were emotional at times, and they went on social media and complained that we didn't we weren't tweeting about them enough, and that's completely warranted. And we tried to improve that. If you look at our social media now today, it's really well balanced from really well balanced from CS:GO to Smash to Vainglory. So we try to do a really good job at that. Honestly, if it wasn't from the community pressure, I probably would not tweet as much of us playing matches. We're mainly doing that to appease some of the more vocal members. If it wasn't for the community, I would probably stick to just doing less posts and really impactful ones at lands. But it's really hard to achieve that. So we try to meet in the middle. We try to not spam, but also tweet interesting posts too. But I'm gonna admit we dropped the ball there. We're a growing organization. I'm still learning every single day. I'm really inexperienced. Just started my company, and I need to learn how to scale it and hire the right people to make sure that things get done when I'm not there.
Okay. So, as far as the end of that situation then, with the manager and the Danish team went, if we tie all these topics together, a big emphasis that you've made throughout this interview is the notion that players have to meet their sponsor obligations, whether that be streaming or certain activations around whatever promotion you have with a sponsor. That's basically the lifeblood of the current TSM business model, and it was also the same business model the last couple of years. It's how you built the org. So did if we tie the two topics together, the NA team and the European team, did it at that point in time teach you that at least at that point in time, TSM couldn't have just some big name European team who was going to be primarily focused just on winning inside the server and not doing a lot of these other things, Because if I look around the scene, Like the big orgs in NA, in general, a lot of them did go with NA teams, and they did. For example, teams like Cloud9 and Team Liquid, even when they weren't necessarily winning the tournament, yeah, they could have obviously very big social media engagement, and they could get all the streaming hours, and they could get all the extra videos around their team. Is this the part of the reason why you've never gone back and gotten like a really good European team again, or you've never been in the bidding for some huge name team again?
No, it comes down to a pure business decision, right? It's not like there's a difference between like hitting a crazy amount of hours and hitting like reasonable hours, right? Like right now, even with our NA team, they don't stream at all because you need to have a big balance of both in order to be successful in sports. With us specifically, the reason why things didn't work out with our CS:GO team was because right now in esports, it's an area of esports is really hot, right? There's a lot of people looking to get in, really, really wealthy people, and they want to get in at a point where that doesn't make sense for a team that has been built in esports and that's made money from esports. Or I've actually built my company through my websites in League of Legends. And that's how I grew my company. But in esports specifically, when people are looking to get in with any industry, if you want to get into an industry that's already starting to establish, you have to pay a premium amount of money in order to get in, right? Like I think what's that Dinh team, the Danish soccer club, they're paying their players they're paying their players 20,000 a month each, right? Like they're not going to make their money back, but they're willing to lose that money to invest in for the future, right?
And TSM isn't.
I'm willing to lose that money, but only at a certain point, man. Like just for example, like Thorin, like okay, I don't even want to use the example, right? But some people can afford something, some people can't. I'm willing to lose money to invest in for the future. It's just how much. Like you have to keep in mind, I started my business and I'm not nearly as wealthy as people think I am. So how do you expect me to compete against like 100 millionaire or billionaire? They make more money in a week than I make in a year. It's just basic principle, right? Like I am willing to invest in the long run. That's why I started with my NA team, was to learn how to develop talent. Because if I can learn how to develop talent, then I don't need to pay the biggest paychecks every single year to sign the best talent, right? Right now in esports, that's the name of the game right now. If you're some rich dude, you can sign whoever you want. I think if you're a billionaire and you want to spend $20 million to sign all the best players you can. Even for Dignitas that just got acquired, they couldn't compete against $20,000 per player per month. Some people, you can't just win some battles, and we couldn't win that battle because that's not how our business functions. I'm willing to invest. I want to be clear. I'm willing to invest in the long run, just not at the rates that these guys are playing ball at for what I was going to get. I wanted to buy something and invest into something that would be sustainable.
Okay. So, I mean, you actually had said a few weeks ago, before the seangares and Shazam announcement happened, that you were going to double the budget for the CSGO team in 2017. And so that makes it sound like there's this serious commitment to CSGO. Like it's not just a side game that you just have just to be in an E-League or something like this, which is what a lot of people thought when you had the NA CSGO team initially. So how would you explain this? What is the commitment to CSGO? What is the commitment to the future for TSM?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to figure out what's happening right now with our current team, but I think the goal was that we wanted to have our North American team and develop them, and on top of that too, we wanted to have a premier team to also like learn how to develop talent. I think that's really important for us, and that's our personal goal within this game. Was we wanted to create another squad to do that, so we're able to learn how to do that. I think a lot of teams, I mean, obviously the teams that have been in CS:GO for a long time have that type of knowledge and know-how, and they're a lot more successful than us. And I think that before anything, we need to learn how to do that too. We've been there, and we paid for the best team at one point, right? And after that we were lost. We weren't successful, and we didn't know what to do, and we were really reliant on them. And I made it a personal goal to do that, to be able to develop talent. So that was my main focus. I wanted to figure out like how to better our infrastructure. That's why I had that talk with John. Hey, how can I make a better environment for you? And so that was my main focus. Is that I think of esports as 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I want I want to work in esports when I'm 50 years old, and so I gotta pick and choose my battles. I can't win every battle, man.
Okay. So what the with a lot of the public backlash over all the topics we've discussed in this interview, a general sentiment, if I was to put like a face onto all the negative kind of backlash of most of the people, it would go like this. People would say, right, you had the Danish team, they were one of the best in the game, but people think this is, but you didn't handle it properly, and you lost that team. They were gone. You got the NA team, and it didn't do well in the server. It didn't perform very well. They had like one good performance, and then now you've had a scenario where you had a chance to maybe rebuild. You got like what looked like the perfect piece. You had seangares. That's blown up. That's gone. So why even stay in CS:GO? Why not just leave? Why not go back to League of Legends where you know the scene and you've been able to build teams over and over again? Why stay in CS:GO? If that was the community question, Reginald? Why stay in CS:GO? What's the benefit of you being in CS:GO?
Well, I think that CS:GO is really valuable if you're able to perform on the top end, right? And I think that that's the goal is to be able to get to that point eventually, and do it based on our own merits versus just buying the best team for a certain period of time. And that's my ultimate goal. Once it gets to be the very best, you're able to attend all the majors, generate revenue through stickers, and also figure out ways to generate revenue. I think a lot of people are investing in esports right now overall, just as something long term to figure out how they can make money off of it for the future. And I think, like I said, and then I'm saying again, it's really important to be able to develop talent. I think that us being a part of the scene actually isn't really negative to anyone. If anything, originally when we first came in, we pushed boundaries and helped player competition go up. And on top of that too, what we're doing is we're helping these young players in rank S, start their careers, right? So if you look at the players we picked up this year, we picked up Twice and Sick to try to develop them, and without us, those players, would have had to wait a while before someone was able to bet on them. And I was really happy when they performed and took fourth at ECS. That was awesome, and if I actually felt like we took part in it, right? But when the Danish team won and they took first, I was happy for them, but it didn't feel like I contributed anything to it outside of just signing them a check and saying, "Hey, buy whatever you want. You want a manager? I'll get you your own manager." It didn't feel like we created that success. We weren't a part of it. I didn't make that. I don't know. It's hard to explain. So I wanted to do it the way I did in League of Legends, and it's really difficult, right? Because in League of Legends, I was a former player, shot caller, strategist. I understood the game really well. So I'm able to replicate that success. We're not able to replicate it in CSGO because we're not experienced enough, and we haven't been a part of the scene long enough. I don't see how we've hurt the scene by being a part of it so far. And so I think that those people are just taking a really aggressive stance because they're not happy with the PEA and the Sean situation. I do think that that situation overall was, a lot of people just jumped on the bandwagon. They didn't really, they weren't focused on just like completely listening to the facts. At the same time, I also made a ton of mistakes too. So yeah, there are things to definitely blame me, but a lot of things that I'm being blamed for is also not necessarily fair.
Okay. So at the end of the interview, what would your final words be? What would your message be at the end?
Um, hmm. This is a really long interview. It's really hard to gather my thoughts. I mean, of course, thanks for having this interview with me, hearing me out. Hoping that a lot of the viewers get to the end of this interview. I know I was pretty repetitive. I addressed economics a lot. I really wanted to make that a really big point in this interview. Overall, no hard feelings. I'm gonna just try to figure out where we belong in the ecosystem and move on with it. At the end of the day, that's pretty much it. And so, yeah,